All right, welcome everybody. My name is Bill Streilein, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer within the CDAO. How many people have heard of the CDAO? Excellent. Okay, well, it stands for the Chief Digital and AI Office. And I officially work for the officer, and my role as Chief Technology Officer is to think about the long-term implications of AI and think from a technical perspective about the architecture that we need to bring into the DoD. So what you'll see today are vision slides, conceptual slides that help us think about what it means to adopt AI across the DoD. It is not necessarily how the DoD is going to adopt AI, but it is certainly something I'm pushing for. And so hopefully I can change minds and get people to think about it, because up to this point, we've had a lot of impediments to that the CDAO was set up to address. So just to sort of set the stage, this is a competitive environment we're in. We all know that. It's a different kind of competition that you might see in the marketplace, though. It's an existential kind of competition where, as you know, various folks around the world from different countries, adversarial nations have declared he who manages AI the best will win, that sort of stuff. So there's this real need to make sure that we understand what AI represents from a defense and security standpoint, and that we have it under control so that we continue to survive, if you will. So this is the way that I think about it. I welcome questions and comments. Certainly after this we can talk, and if there's anything, please ask me. I like to think about this problem as bringing AI across a range of needs across the DoD. If you look at the x-axis along the bottom there, there's enterprise needs. This is more like the business of running the Department of Defense. There's operations, which includes logistics and enabling the warfighting to happen. And then, of course, there's warfighting on the way. To adopt AI, there's various words that you can use to describe it. I've used these words to say, along a scale there, it could be you're just starting with AI, it's nascent, maybe we've demonstrated. It might even be common to leverage AI within the domain. But it isn't yet ubiquitous. And once it's ubiquitous, the idea is that it's integral in everything that we do. We're constantly leveraging its capabilities to provide insights that are there. You've probably heard the term decision advantage. I like to say decision dominance, and I think it's because those decisions are what we get insights from. And those insights enable us to succeed in what we're doing. So I've drawn a couple of lines here, what I call frontiers. And they're cartoons, obviously. And to some extent, I think I've had some folks disagree with this, but in general, it kind of represents the state of AI adoption within the DoD. Largely, there's a lot more adoption. So there's more adoption on the business side than there is on the warfighting side. And I think that's not many people would argue with that. The reasons for that we'll get to in a second, but they have to do largely with the fact connectivity, technical issues, things like that, but also the problems that are supposedly hard out there. But it's important once you've drawn your frontier to ask, where's the adversary frontier? And that's just purely notional, but the sense is that it's beyond where we are. And the question is, how do we get there? How do we get beyond that? How do we stay competitive, if you will? Is it the case that we want to be all the way up here in the top, where AI is across everything? That might not be the case. And so the reason for putting these slides together and walking through this sort of conceptual thought process is to ask ourselves that very question. Where do we really want to be? So moving this frontier requires greater adoption, so we definitely want to move up along the y-axis here. Capability, automation, and autonomy. I was wondering, what does the future look like? And I've heard a phrase that says the future is autonomy. Now that can mean that we have robots like we saw this morning, or it could mean that we have autonomous decision making. What level do we want in that? I'm not saying we want Skynet. I'm just saying we're heading towards a future in which more and more things will become autonomous. I am a big proponent for humans always being in control and always knowing it, so I'm a big proponent of things that give us explainability for what's going on, responsible AI, but really we're heading towards autonomy. So the CDAO was set up to accelerate the adoption of AI across the DoD for the purpose of decision advantage, as I described before. And so we have these key functions that we're leveraging to increase the adoption. It's strategic first for leading and overseeing the DoD strategy for development, but also policy formation I'm new to the DoD. I joined in February. My background is as an AI researcher at Lincoln Laboratory, where I did a bunch more technical work. And I'm not a policy pundit in any way, but I can see that that is something that drives the department. And so we have the ability to create policy that helps adopt it, helps AI be adopted. But we also want to break down barriers to adoption. A lot of these, I would say, are cultural. There's a lot of adoption barriers based on culture. The DoD is very slow-moving, as you can imagine, and a lot of it is process that has to take place. AI is by its very nature innovative. It represents innovation. It represents, from the talks that I've heard during this conference, people are being asked to rethink how they do their businesses. That represents change for the process, and it's a big barrier. CDAO is also responsible for creating digital infrastructure that enables this adoption. So whether that's creating an LLM's pipeline as an enterprise service, creating data sources, authoritative data sources that everyone can enable, that sort of thing, we have the ability to do that. That is different from other organizations of our type within OSD. For those familiar with the term, and I'm just barely familiar with it, CDAO is a principal staff assistant. So there are other organizations at that level. None of them are doers like we are. We can put out policy and things like that, but we actually also make things. We selectively scale proven capabilities that have relevance to mission fighting. And then we also search digital services. These 5 functions here come from basically our heritage. 4 organizations came together to make the CDAO. There was the JAKE, and I'm sure many people have heard about the JAKE. There was the CDO, the Chief Data Officer. There was a program called Advana, which was a business analytics program. And then finally, there was the Defense Digital Services, which was sort of like a rebel force within the Pentagon who quickly reacted and provided digital capabilities. So these are functions that we leverage to adopt AI. So if we return to our conceptual diagram, this is how I think they align. The red arrows pointing down, pushing down against that frontier are barriers, things that might be in our way as we're trying to adopt AI. First is inaccessible data. There are tons of silos within the DoD. It's very easy to create a silo of data because you only probably see the use of it for your local use case. So we really want to work with policy and strategy mechanisms to open up that data, to make it accessible. We have a term that we use to describe data that's AI ready called VALTIS. See if I can remember what it means. Visible, accessible, understandable, linked, I think. I can't remember all of it is, but if you look it up, it's been put out as a term to describe, if you get all those qualities there, I think maybe on the next slide actually, you'll get accessible data. Another big impediment is the lack of AI trust and resistance. This is a cultural thing. A lot of people don't really understand what AI means, what it represents. They do, and it's totally understandable to think it's Skynet. And if you push AI in there, it's going to take away your jobs and produce something that will wipe out humans. There's other aspects of it. They think that it's just IT. It's not. It's a learning capability. And so our role through toolkits that teach people about it and education is to try to push back on that impediment. Acquisition challenges are a major impediment because the typical process for acquisition takes way too long to acquire something like AI, whose rate of change within industry is months, if not weeks. Very, very fast. So we have the ability we've actually put out several new acquisition models that enable partners within the DoD to access AI much more quickly, on the order of months as opposed to years, decades, if you will. I mentioned siloed and fragmented data, but it's also the case with capabilities. Each one of the services has their own platform for leveraging AI. So we don't want to say wipe those out and create one, but we want to enable the interoperability of those and the federation of those capabilities so that you can be in whichever environment is most comfortable for you. And then finally, there are just technical domain challenges within the warfighting and the operations and so on that need to be addressed. And so we have a team that's focusing specifically on the development of models that can address these really exquisite problems related to defending the nation. One of the ways we're doing it is in an activity called ADA. It stands for AI and Data Accelerator. This is something that was started by the DevSecDef, Kathleen Hicks, over the summer last year. And it specifically focuses on modernizing the combatant commands. We're we're supporting everyone in the DoD, but we recognize that the commands themselves, they, as a joint capability, bring together functions from the services, and they aren't necessarily right now in a position to do that in a modernized way. So they are our first customers, and so we reach out to them, we actually put people in place there, and work with them to set them up and modernize them so that they can, on their own, identify, develop. Develop doesn't necessarily mean they build it themselves, but can identify capabilities needed and go out to industry to bring in things, and then deploy them on their own mission sets. So that capability we really see as changing what is the current siloed approach to DoD to one that is more modern and actually looks a lot more like what's going on in industry right now. So if you think about the apps on your phone, like an Uber app or Waze or some other app, they follow a model like this, where the apps are what you worry about at the top, and a common platform, whether it's cloud or something else, application data platform support the rapid creation of these apps that let you do that. And we want to switch from a case where someone's isolated in a cubicle, sort of by hand putting together information that's relevant to a decision, to one in which a fully integrated command and control, that's what C2 stands for, vision is achievable. So what have we done? About 15 minutes, so I'll go a little bit quicker. So I mentioned some successes in terms of acquisition. We've got a couple of models that we think are really, really useful and already have been leveraged to bring AI capabilities really quickly in. I mentioned the importance of data. So each one of these mechanisms here enables us to have vendors at the ready. They've already been vetted, their capabilities are already understood. And anyone in the DoD that has a need can register their need within these mechanisms, whether it's based on data, whether it's based on test and evaluation, or generally a new AI capability supporting something they need. And within and get a response from vendors. Vendors are there. They're sort of like you're on a mailing list, and you hear about an idea, and you can respond very, very quickly. So these are some of the successes that we've done from the acquisition standpoint. I think we have around 1,500 companies that are already in the other transaction authority there, ready to provide capabilities to the DoD. And then in the area of responsible AI, something that I find very relevant, some of the successes speak to, I actually think we shouldn't just call it AI, we should always call it responsible AI, because that's the only thing we're in the business of doing. The DSE signed a memo implementing responsible AI principles. It's one of the key capabilities within the CDAO, and we are actually collaborating with our international partners to make sure that when we work together, we're all focusing on these responsible aspects. So I wanted to now switch a little bit to a vision that I have for how this can all work together. There are many challenges the DoD faces, which I mentioned before, and so in thinking through what this architecture will look like, this conceptual architecture, we want to come up with something that addresses these aspects, that embodies these, if you will. So the DoD really understands its missions well, and it has access and control over its data. It doesn't necessarily have, of course, there are very, very smart people and innovative, but not at the scale that a company might, especially with some company like one of the FANGs, if you will, Facebook, Apple, and so on. So how do we deal with that? Well, we could focus the DoD on the curation, collection, and sharing of its mission data so that others can build models on it, right? Now that's a difficult problem, but we've got ways to do that. We've got talent and cultural problems. Innovation is, as I mentioned before, sort of an enemy of bureaucracy, I would say. But we can leverage industry by enabling them to build on our data, build models on our data, and then bring them back in while we're working on our DoD skill sets. I believe we should embody a continuous experimentation and continuous delivery. CE/CD versus CI/CD, which many folks have probably heard about. Experimentation, being willing to try, I wouldn't say fail fast because that has a very negative connotation, but try it out and be in a position to experiment before you bring something in. I mentioned the fact that we want our architecture to promulgate the DoD guidance and standards. We're in a position to dictate how things are provided to us. And then to help us understand how existing capabilities can be leveraged, we want to be able to blend our existing modules, like our existing platforms, like Avon, like Codius, like some other platforms that are out there. And so this is the model that we've come up with. It's purely conceptual. You'll notice a big loop in the middle. That is the machine learning ops loop. at a high level. It represents more of the deployment side, but it captures and addresses some of the key challenges that the DoD faces. You'll notice I have the DevSecOps articulated here, but I've also got an indication on the right side for, in general, who is responsible for, working at that layer. And so in this vision, the DoD, as I said, focuses on really the mission, which we know best, if you will, and understanding that mission data, and then providing it through a secure layer here to the innovative ecosystem, which consists of industry, but also the DoD labs. There's competitive model development, which then brings the optimal models down through, again, through this layer of assurance based on responsible AI to deliver containerized models to the mission pipelines. And I say mission pipelines versus model because they don't ever just deliver a model, because it's basically out of date as soon as you do. You need to deliver a pipeline. You need to deliver a way to update that model forever. And that's where the feedback comes in, whether that's operational feedback or changes that happen in the environment and so on. This is admittedly very simple at high level, but it does articulate some of the key principles that are needed, that we need to address, and also captures how people might think about this going forward, as opposed to, for instance, the DoD adopting everything internally, which would never scale and would necessarily, and we always have the challenge of trying to bring in innovation. So if we do that and come back to our initial view, it might be that we end up there at the top, but through successive iteration of the digital ecosystem, we can move that frontier from the lower left through enterprise operations and warfighting to a state in which our strategic capability is beyond where we are today through federation, integration, competition, and dominance. So that's everything. And I appreciate everybody listening. I don't know if we have any time for questions, or maybe I'll say one question. Anybody? There. Yes.
How are you, when we talk about accelerating these programs, how is what you're doing related to the requirements process? And how are you guys, do we still have to have an identified gap, or are you somehow working around that?
No, we still have to. The acquisition models allow us to rapidly express that. For companies, we know then through those acquisition mechanisms, we know what companies, they've registered with us with their capabilities, and we can quickly indicate what we want a proposal on. In some senses, it bypasses the really, really long-term requirements, and we're speaking to them more about problems we need solved as opposed to requirements that need to be filled.
Are the programs directly giving you guys here are things we need to solve today?
Absolutely. So thank you very much.